When the rock band Queen introduced their idea of Bohemian Rhapsody in 1975, their recording label could not foresee the enormous hit the epic song would become. One that 4.5 decades later is still perhaps more memorized by American youth than any scripture, the Lord's Prayer, or any part of the United States Constitution. He could not see beyond the constraints of his experience in the music industry, and he will forever be remembered as the man who lost Queen. As Helen Keller, who could neither hear nor see, said, "The greatest tragedy in life is people who have sight, but no vision." People who have sight, but have no vision. There are numerous stories of people who lacked vision. A Hollywood producer scrawled a curt rejection note on a manuscript that became Gone with the Wind. He had no vision for the success that movie would enjoy. Orville and Wilbur Wright, on December 17, 1903, their homemade airplane in the air for 59 seconds rushed a telegram to their sister in Dayton, Ohio. The telegram said, "First sustained flight today, 59 seconds. Period. Hope to be home by Christmas." The sister rushed to the newspaper office. The next morning, the newspaper headed the story, "Popular local bicycle merchants to be home for holidays." The hapless editors saw what was obvious, but missed the real story. Vision is never about seeing the obvious. It's about looking ahead, about seeing what is not there yet. It's about seeing the potential behind the obvious. The gospel writers wrote about Jesus going up the mountain with Peter, James, and John, his disciples. And on that mountaintop, the disciples had a vision, and in that vision, they could truly see who Jesus really was and is: the Son of God. The very presence of God in divine form, glorious, bright, a dazzling, shining light. This story is a vision story. Visions are those rare moments in life when there is no fog, no haze, no trees, no obstructions, when you clearly see the way of God for your life. So let's talk for a moment about visions. Visions are those moments of clarity when you recognize God's presence, God's call upon your life. Visions are not hallucinations created by substance abuse or medically induced, or just attending a Queen concert, perhaps. No, visions are not hallucinations. They're not fantasies either. Visions or fantasies are most often occur when you cannot change the real world around you. And so a person creates an imaginary world, a pretend world, an escape from the real world. Think Harry Potter, Cinderella. Visions are not hallucinations. Visions are not fantasies. Visions are those special moments in life when you see life with utter clarity and you see the way to walk humbly with God. And visions still happen today, most generally when we feel closest to God, and often for people during their prayer life. In the Bible story this week, Peter grasped at a spectacular vision, says Isaac Villegas. Desperate, he says, to capture the spirit of the moment and reluctant to return to the mundane. He has stumbled into the sublime and he wants to harness this experience. He wants for this episode to make a difference in his life and the life of his friends, he says. For this event on the mountaintop to shift the axis of power, to rearrange the cosmos. He envisions grandeur. This will ignite the revolution he has dreamed about, the dawn of redemption, writes Isaac Villegas in the Christian Century for this week. He continues, in his astonishment, Peter rambles about tents to house the majesty of it all, tents for the presence of God, like the tabernacle of old. Peter begs to hold, to contain this spectacular presence. He makes a proposal for how this meaningful event may persist, for the fleeting to become permanent, he writes. And he says, we are like Peter, desperate for an enduring transfiguration. We are desperate for God's presence to settle upon us, he says, upon our lives and our neighborhoods and our world, a permanent transformation of society, the liberation of the world from the reign of sin. We want nothing less, he says, than the transfiguration of all things with the eternal goodness of God's life, starting with us, in our hearts and our lives, as we dwell in the power of God and prepare to make this redemption to the world, to take this redemption to the world. He writes, Lord, it's good for us to be here, Peter says to Jesus. I'll make 3 dwelling places, or tents, or tabernacles, or shrines here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Mountaintop experiences are famously fleeting. They're also famous for visions. These are those special times when you see with utmost clarity who God is, where God is calling us to go, who God is calling us to be. No fog, no haze, no obstructions. And there for a moment you see with utter clarity a vision of who God really is, of who God's people really are and should be. There, in that moment, you are transformed. In the Bible, the fundamental mountaintop is called a theophany. That's a fancy word, theo, meaning God in the Greek language, epiphany, meaning revelation. We have just journeyed through Epiphany together in these past several weeks since Christmas. The season of the church year when God is revealed definitively in Jesus Christ, God's Son. And that journey ends this week as we begin and prepare to begin a new season together in Lent on Ash Wednesday. When we meet Jesus, when we have our epiphany, when God is revealed to us in Jesus, whether it's on the mountaintop or somewhere else, maybe even in a valley, we are changed. We are transformed, transfigured into a new creation. We're sent to bear light and life to a world filled with death and void of light. As a boy, Robert Louis Stevenson looked out his window one evening. Those were the days before electric lights. And Stevenson saw the town lamplighter coming along. As this lamplighter lit the street lamps in succession, Stevenson was impressed at the sight. He wrote about the lamplighter who went along punching holes in the darkness. Punching holes in the darkness. Jesus Christ came into this world as a light, and he punched holes in the darkness. And we are called to do the same. To meet Jesus in the valleys of life and punch some holes in the darkness. As a congregation, we have been doing just that. Punching some holes in the darkness. 7 years ago, we engaged together in a process of transformation to become a welcoming community of disciples of Christ. A true movement for wholeness right here in this part of a fragmented world. We began our process of transformation together, taking a Sabbath from doing the same old things that we had done. And with renewed vision and energy began something new. In fact, a whole lot of something's new. We increased our visibility in the community. I've shared this story on countless other occasions, but when I first came home to Central Christian Church, for those of you that don't know, this is where I was born and raised and baptized and sent out into the ministry right here from this congregation. When I first came home, people would ask me, "Oh, you're a pastor. What church do you serve?" And I would say, "Central Christian Church in Bourbonnais." And they would say, "Where's that?" And that was a bit of dismay for me, because as a youth, I remember walking in here when there was no drywall on the walls and no windows and those plugs, and there were beams holding it together, and we were celebrating the building of this new location. I remember knocking on doors, asking people for money to build this place too, and having some of those doors slammed in my face. So I was a bit dismayed. How could we have been here almost 30 years and people not know where Central Christian Church in Bourbonnais was? And so I would say, well, it's across from Clancy Gurnan Funeral Home, because I figured everybody's got to go to the funeral home at least once in their life sometime, right? And I'd get this puzzled look. And I'd say, well, it's across the street from People's Bank. It's next to First American Bank. It's next to the fitness center. And they would say, "Oh, that parking lot?" And I would say, "Yeah, that parking lot. There's a church back there too," I would say. We increased our visibility in the community with new signage and having parade floats and participating by painting school buses for demolition derbies at the county fair and community events such as our trunk or treat, the first event we held on our parking lot, where we were known for. We enhanced our hospitality in person and online. We renovated a space and created a welcome center, and we enhanced how we operate on social media and online, and we offered our spaces to things like Radiance yoga classes. We increased our impact in our community. We formed and were the foundational member of and housed still to this day, getting ready for our 7th year of Blessings in a Backpack River Valley Communities, starting out touching the lives of 50 students and their families and making impact in 8 different schools, now 353 students and their families every single week in 16 different schools across our community. That happens out of this place, and partly because of you. It also increased our impact in the communities. We welcome over 400 volunteers into this space to pack those bags and distribute them every single week of the school year. That's a lot of impact. A lot of impact. We also, that Blessings in a Backpack led to fundraising needs and another idea of how to use that parking lot that we were known for, and cruise nights that began and developed. Some of the guys in the congregation had a love for classic and hot rod cars, and we put that together into a ministry of raising funds to impact kids' lives in our community. Our neighborhood impact, just by that, touched the life of one very special neighborhood member. His name was Dan. Dan was a veteran of the armed services. Dan had lots of issues. Dan came to our cruise nights, came to events here. Sometimes he just came by to talk. And on a cruise night back in 2018 or 19, I'm losing track, I think it was 2019. 2019, he came to the June cruise night last year, which got rained out. And he brought a vehicle that he had got that he was so proud of. It was loud, it was a beast. And he brought it over for the cruise night, and it got rained out. There were thunderstorms, and we weren't able to have the whole cruise night. But he was on cloud 9. He shared with me that night at the cruise night that he'd had an accident over in the Jewel parking lot. He said that he had been the victim of a hit and run, that when he was walking across the parking lot, somebody had run him over, and they had left. And he'd had lots of tests, and everything seemed to be okay, but he wasn't feeling so good, and he was bruised up pretty bad. And he went home from that cruise night, and he went home with the Lord right after that. And he was in a special place, probably a mountaintop for him, because he had been here and he had had joy, he had been welcomed, he had felt like he was as close to God as he could be. That is real impact. Those cruise nights, and then we developed farmers markets, and now Market 102. We began offering people a way to buy alternative foods in our community and to get products that are made locally in our community. It's kind of an extension to our fair trade, if you will. And what does the impact of that do? We make a little bit of money, a few dimes here and there, to be honest, but not a lot of money. What is the impact of that? Well, I know there are some people in this congregation who can tell you stories of how many conversations they've had at their tents of people who just needed to open up. And when they came to that market, for some reason, somehow, that's when they opened up. And they needed a hug, and they needed a prayer. And some of them came back to worship and are still here even today. We invited agencies helping the homeless to use our facility, and we were an integral part to the founding and development of Fortitude Community Outreach, which not only did outreach on Thursdays as they continue to do downtown, but expanded into a PADS program, offering housing for homeless folks in the coldest months of the year. Last year, we were able to participate as one of the congregations serving as a PADS location and offering 31 nights of shelter. And I don't know if your memory is very good, but last winter was nothing like today, not in the least. Last winter, we had that thing called the polar vortex. Remember that? Remember when it went to 24 below zero with a wind chill of 48 below zero? I do. I remember it well because we were right here at 2 o'clock in the morning when the temperature, 3 o'clock, something like that, when the temperature hit that lowest number in tens of maybe 100 years. I don't remember how long the record goes back, but a long, long time. I remember when all 9 furnaces in this building were running at full tilt, trying to keep it warm enough for those of us inside, and when all the windows were frosting over with ice. And when 15 people survived, in part because they had a warm place to stay that night. Warm food and a welcome. What kind of impact does that make on a person's life? It might draw them to a church community. That can happen. We took Ash Wednesday out into the community. Some of us sat at McDonald's and Starbucks and the public library and Kankakee Community College, and we offered ashes to folks as the beginning of a Holy Lent. We met Jesus in the valleys of life. We brought light into a world devoid of it, where it needs to be. And anytime we carry the light out into the world, we will meet Jesus in those valleys. Through small acts of kindness, acts of service and charity, even the support of Week of Compassion. You heard the story that Sarah shared this morning about First Christian Church in Jefferson City, Missouri, and all the impact they're having. Well, I could tell you as lengthy a story that I'll spare you, but I could tell you a story about how Davis Memorial Christian Church in Taylorville is doing the same thing right now. Planting trees, renovating homes, helping people back into their homes, serving as a mission station because of our gifts to Week of Compassion and our impact. Whenever we drop our judgmental attitudes, whenever we walk humbly with God as sinners in need of forgiveness, whenever we challenge and change systems that discriminate, benefiting the powerful over those voices that are often unheard, whenever we change our habits and choices to a more just and sustainable way of living, whenever we find another way to live, the way that Christ gives and shows and demonstrates for us, the one who did not claim equality with God as something to exploit, but emptied himself, became obedient to death, even death on an instrument of terror and shame and execution. When we adopt that mind, when we have that same mind, then we are punching holes in the darkness. Amen.